Welcome, apprentices and acolytes, to unlock the knowledge, and I want to know, why don't you like Andor? For real, let me know. Please, ready up.
Ready up, my destiny.
Welcome, apprentices and acolytes, to unlock the knowledge. I am Lord Dagovere, and it's so good to have you coming into the Dark Temple, visited by Mara Jade, Luke Skywalker, and Kyle Katarn, and so many of the Force sensitives like yourself. And for those non-Force sensitives that I know listen to the podcast, fam, yeah. Welcome to the Dark Temple, visited by Mara Jade, Luke Skywalker. I love it, man. I can say that all the time. I love it. The Dark Temple, it's got a... For those of you that do not know, by the way, the Dark Temple itself is on Dromund Kaas. Dromund Kaas is one of my favorite planets in Star Wars, okay? And the greatest thing about Dromund Kaas is in Star Wars The Old Republic, the MMO that came out with EA and BioWare, about 2012, 2011, around that time. I actually got a computer for this game. I was so freaking excited. And, something about it, man, I didn't really have a lot of people to play with. Everybody that I played with was people that I met online. But I was one of those nerds, I was heavily into PvP. But I also loved just being my character and role-playing and stuff. And it was so funny because I was on, what was the first server? I was on so many servers, okay? And you have to understand the reason why I can't remember all the servers is because the player base was so massive at the start of this game that they had so many servers. But then after a while, there's so many diehard MMO players. You know how gamers are, how hardcore they are. They get to max level and they want end game the first week. And that wasn't how that game was gonna work. It was the start of this new age of gaming where stuff is created but it's not finished. And so they put it out so people can play and they can get money. And Star Wars: The Old Republic was one of those games. And yeah, the player base just dipped and they started losing just players like crazy. And so they ended up removing a lot of the servers. And so the first one that I went to was Prophecy of the Five. That was the first server that I was on, and that was a big East Coast server, and I actually would consistently rank the top 10, top 15 Sith Inquisitors, which was, by the way, this was the most packed, die-hard PvP East Coast server that was on there. And then I ended up going to Jung Ma, and Jung Ma was the RP PvP server. It was one of the only RP PvP servers that were there. And I really enjoyed it, but I was the best assassin on that server, man. There wasn't, competitive-wise, it wasn't that competitive, to be honest. I just remember being on Tatooine and all these open-world PvP areas, and I didn't die too often, and if I did die, I was just kind of and then after a while, I think that server was no longer there, and I think they migrated everybody back into Prophecy of the Five, but now it's Satil Shan and a few others. There isn't many servers. I think there's only 4 or 5 servers, but I remember going there and playing that game, and at the man, it was 12-hour shifts every day when I used to work for that little Mexican restaurant for 3-4 years, and I ended up always being so excited about coming home and just playing by myself with Star Wars: The Old Republic. And I would always sit there in the Imperial spaceport, the Imperial space station, which was so cool, and I would always just walk around and you see all the players going around doing their thing. But then it was also Dromund Kaas, man. Going to Dromund Kaas, something about the ambience with the rain and the way the temple was, the Dark Temple was there. Oh man, I could just hear it every single day. I love the Dark Temple, man. So when you guys see that, I'm bringing you into my favorite place in the world. All right, it's literally my favorite place in Star Wars. I even made a home inside on Dromund Kaas, and what was so cool about the home, that when they finally, I think it was 6 years or so after the game had come out, 4 or 5 years, I can't remember. They finally let you do player housing. I think it was called Strongholds. I think that's what it was called. The update was, and I got you had so many choices for between Tatooine and what was the other one? It was Coruscant and a couple of the home worlds and stuff like that. So Tython and a few others. Then you got Nar Shaddaa, but the one that I wanted the most was Dromund Kaas, and I ended up getting this player home. And what was so cool was that in the back in one of the windows, you could see the Dark Temple from the Stronghold. It was so cool, man. And so, of course, it was pouring rain, lightning inside my house, inside my stronghold. And where I put my bed, I could see the Dark Temple across the way. And it was awesome. Just, faintly seeing it. Like, it was just, like the silhouette of the Dark Temple. And I love that, man. That was so cool. It's so funny because that temple is, like, so horrific and terrifying. But to me, I don't know, man. It was just, it was different. It was like, a secluded base, and I love that. Just a solitary fortress of solitary. It was so awesome, man. I really enjoyed that. But Andor fans and Andor haters, I want to know, why don't you like Andor? And I'm gonna tell you right now, I love Andor. I think Andor is, I don't want to say peak Star Wars. I think it's very close to being peak. Okay, I do think it's probably one of the best Disney projects that we've had, and just because the writing is phenomenal, the acting is phenomenal, all the sets look amazing, sound design, everything about this is peak. The one thing missing from Andor is just the Force and lightsabers. More so the Force, because I feel like Star Wars, and I have a video coming out about this actually, I feel like Star Wars is different, and there's only certain things that you can get in Star Wars that you can't get anywhere else, and that is lightsabers and, the dark side, the light side, things like that. I'm not talking about, when I talk about dark side, light side, I'm not just talking about Sith and Jedi. I'm talking about people. People do bad things. People do good things, Normal, regular people are heroes. Normal, regular people are villains. And I was just thinking about that, man, like, what if someone like Dedra, what if someone like Cyril, what if they had some minute ability, some minute Force sensitivity, I think that would make the show a lot more compelling for a lot of people. But the thing is, too, about Andor, I think that there's just a lot of people that do not like that style of show because it's a Game of Thrones, it's a Sopranos, it's a very, like, slow burn. You have to watch every single minute of these episodes. And I think with Star Wars, I'm not so sure if the casual fan base, right? And by the way, it doesn't matter how much you love or you don't like Star Wars or you don't like it enough. Listen, I don't care if you watch books, comics, expanded universe stuff, or you only watch the movies. Okay, you love Star Wars and you love Star Wars. That's the way it is, fam. I don't judge you in any way, shape, or form. But what I think about live action, I think that live action creates and brings in the majority of the fans. Why? Because it's live action. They take it seriously. This is the real legit stuff. It's unlike, for me, in my opinion, unlike me, where I'm super hardcore. I'm obsessed with Star Wars, okay? I need the comics. I need the books. I need everything. I don't care if it's animated or not, unless we get to, like, Forces of Destiny or Young Jedi. That stuff I can't really get into. I can get into the Lego stuff because Legos is cool and I'm a grown man-child. Yeah, whatever. But everything else, it needs to have a certain authenticity of Star Wars, and a lot of that is in the expanded universe. A lot of that is in the animated Clone Wars, Bad Batch, things like that. I can Star Wars Visions, even, like, I can get into a lot of animation, a lot of non-live action stuff, but 90% of the fandom cannot. And that's okay, right? That's okay, that's fine. But when I think about Star Wars, I think it also cuts people off if it doesn't have these things that they're used to, i.e. lightsabers and the Force. So I understand that criticism. I understand that. I understand it completely. But outside of that, I'm not so sure what's not to like about the show. I think the show is phenomenal, man. I think the soundtrack is amazing. And it's so funny because I wasn't hooked on this show until I heard about George Lucas being on the set. And I was like, okay, all right, maybe there's something here. Maybe something's going on. And, George Lucas is on a lot of sets, even when they don't announce that he's on the set, right? But for the biggest criticism for me outside of that was, I'm not so sure if I'm excited about a show about Cassian Andor. And I wasn't, because I still feel like, even with the show, even with how much I love Andor as a series, I am not so sure if Cassian is such a compelling character to the point where I need to watch an entire series off of him. Now, the show, in my opinion, is made much better because of everybody else, because of someone like Cyril, because of someone like Dedra, right? Those characters really help amplify. Now, it's missing K2SO. It's missing a lot still, But that's the thing too, though, is we're probably not going to get a lot of it just because there's so much criticism about the show and how much money it was and the era of COVID and things like that. I guess we're only going to get 2 seasons, which is sad. I really think that Lucasfilm should invest more into this series, and they should have done about 5 to 7 seasons of the show because this show deserves it. And I think in the long run, when you see the potential of the show, when you introduce other characters, when you introduce an Inquisitor that we've never seen before, you know, with that writing, with that story group, with that writer's room, man, I really believe that you can get something incredible into this. But I want to know exactly, outside of the issues that I've listed, and the main issue, right? The main objective here is figuring out why people do not like Andor. And I believe the main criticism is that, you know, there's no lightsabers, you know, there's no, I don't know, Force and everything else. You know, when I think about Star Wars, there are things that are quintessential to Star Wars, and those are the first 2 things that I think about immediately. And then you think about the obvious good and the obvious evil. And very similarly to Rogue One, which I feel like was a lot of criticisms for Rogue One, was that you think about Cassian Andor, and the first scene that we always talk about in this podcast is how Cassian Andor goes up to the person that was, you know, his informant, and then he kills his informant in fear of the informant ratting out to the Imperials, you know. And that was one of those things that's in Star Wars that's never really been a thing. The only person that's ever been so close to that in Star Wars is probably Han Solo in the original trilogy, right? He's the good bad guy, or the bad good guy. No, he's the good bad guy. That's what he is. He's the good bad guy, and he ends up being a hero at the end of that. And that's why I think so many, older fans really enjoyed Han Solo and who he was in the original trilogy. And of course, there's always the debate and the fight about, he shot first, Greedo shot first, McClunky, whatever it is now. And I think it's so silly. But I feel like when you see Rogue One, you see Cassian Andor do that. He does that deed. That was a whole other different type of style of Star Wars. It's a drama. And I think Star Wars is a drama. It's a space drama. It is. Yes, it's heavily political. Star Wars has always been heavily political. But the thing is, too, is like when you see something like Andor, I think so many people, maybe it's just too much for them. And I can understand that. But at the same time, too, is like, I'm not going to watch any other show that's like that, to be honest, at all. I don't care. I don't care if it's, Batman or whatever. I'm just not going to watch it, bro. But if you slap the Star Wars title, the Star Wars branding on that, I'm gonna watch it. I'm gonna watch it because it is Star Wars. And that's probably the coolest damn thing for me, is when an idea that I do not like, that I'm not open to, and then you Star Warsify it. You give it the branding of Star Wars. Yes, I love that. I think it's amazing. Someone I heard on the internet was talking about that it's like Blade Runner Star Wars, and I think that's awesome. I think that's really cool. I think there's a lot of pretty incredible attributes that Blade Runner has as a franchise. Because when you think of Blade Runner, both of them are so intriguing, and they're cult classics too. And when you think about that, I think that a lot of Star Wars is cult classics, especially the prequels, right? And something about, I think it fits so well. I think it fits so well. And I think about that opening scene where Andor is walking in the rain, and that beautiful, yes, Blade Runner-esque, Tron Legacy-esque music. And I've kind of always wanted that in Star Wars. I'm telling you, the only thing is missing is some brand new character that I've never heard of that's Force sensitive. And what I love about that too is that it doesn't have to be an obvious, powerful Force sensitive. It could just be someone that is manipulating the Force so minutely that they're unscathed, that maybe perhaps they don't even realize it's happening. And I love that too, because that's also how a new Hope is. I think about Luke Skywalker all the time in his X-Wing, and he ends up guiding the lasers to destroy the Death Star inside the little hole. And I felt like that's probably some of the best way the Force has been interpreted in Star Wars. It's just that little idea of like, oh my god, the computer can't hit it, this awesome, incredible X-Wing pilot with a whole bunch of experience. He can't hit it, but this one kid that's just got a little skill, but something else, this it factor, he's able to do it, you know? And so I've always loved the idea of introducing that into something like Andor. And I think that Andor can handle it. And I think that Andor can also handle it really well compared to, you know, some of the more lackadaisical, the lazy types of styles that we've seen in the last decade or so, the last 15 years or so with Star Wars. Even with like animated series and things like that, I think there's some things that are a little silly, but at the same time too, Star Wars can get silly. But I love Andor, guys. I'm that guy. That guy that you're talking about on Twitter is probably me, and that's okay. Now, I don't think that Andor is like the greatest Star Wars project of all time. No, I think that's The Mandalorian. I think that's The Mandalorian, man. I think that's The Mandalorian and Return of the Jedi and Revenge of the Sith. I just think nothing can ever beat those things. I love The Force Awakens. But The Force Awakens is diminished by the rest of the movies that follow it. But it can still get better through other projects. You know, I'm not a sequel hater. I'm just a sequel not so sure or person. You know, because I'm just not sure what's gonna happen in the future with it. But outside of that, I love Andor, man. I would love to see more. I'm very saddened at the fact that we're only gonna get 2 seasons. Because I think when a company no longer wants to invest in something, I think that says a lot about how much faith they have in it. And it doesn't matter how many people are out on the internet asking for them to make more, asking for them to continue these characters in some other form. At the end of the day, if it's not making money, it's not making money, and the wheels aren't going to turn. And, you know, we live in an age where the negativity is extremely loud. And it doesn't matter what's on your Twitter feed, your For You page, or the algorithm on YouTube. There are negative people everywhere, and there are positive people everywhere. But for me, I see a lot more negative these days than positive about everything. And I'm not sure if it's just because every single algorithm defaults to flushing negativity down my throat and wanting to brainwash me with these takes about how this thing that you love so much is terrible and you should feel bad about it. It's kind of overwhelming at times. And you know me, you know my channel. I'm mostly positive. You know, I am more of a realistic positive person rather than a shill positive person. And I also just don't really appreciate how negative things and toxic things can get, because I also lived in the era of the prequel trilogy where everything was hated. Everything was hated. You know, and they don't talk about that enough, how similar the hate is for the sequel trilogy is to the prequel trilogy, and it's very similar. It's literally like the back of the same card right now. So when I think about Andor, I love it and I want it, but I understand why there's a lot of people out there that do not like it. And that's okay, because I will never forget, although I really enjoyed Andor, I enjoyed it so much, and I do think it's definitely up there. It's top. It's an almost peak, but it's so close to being peak for me. It's really good. Okay? And but I remember the first 3 episodes, and I didn't even react to it because there was nothing to react to. Like, I could not react, and my reaction, you know, majorly at the start was a reactionary channel. And now it's when I remember going through that, I was just like, dude, no one's gonna watch this. This is not a show people are gonna watch and search. X person reacts to, you know, Luke Skywalker returning. It's not that show. And the Easter eggs, the memorberries, all those things in there, that Star Wars happens in every other series, from live action to animation. That was not it. This was something completely different. Was it too different for everybody else? Probably. But for me, I really enjoyed it, and I hope we get to see more, and I'm very interested to see how they evolve this, because I love this show, but I'm more interested to see why you didn't like it. And if you have made it to this far, to 20 minutes of this podcast of me yabbering about Star Wars and being apologetic to people like myself who really love this, I just gotta say thank you for listening, and if you can, please put your comments in there. Reach out to me on Twitter. Let me know why you didn't like it in the most non-toxic way possible, without insulting yourself and myself, please. But outside of that, I love Star Wars. I'm always down to have discussions, and I want to know why you hated it, why it's the worst thing ever to you, why you're just so upset and this, oh my god, Disney, worst things ever. Because at the end of the day, fam, I'm gonna listen to it, and I'm always gonna be here inside the Dark Temple, visited by Mara Jade, Luke Skywalker, and Kyle Katarn, and so many other Force sensitives like yourself. I am Lord Dagovere, and I'll see you around, fam. Deuces.